In 2021, a small rhythm game called Friday Night Funkin', or FNF, exploded in popularity across the internet. What started as a simple indie game quickly became a cultural phenomenon, attracting millions of players and inspiring one of the largest modding communities in gaming. Fans from around the world created their own characters, songs, stories, and custom modifications, commonly known as mods, which helped keep the game alive long after its initial release. And even now, people are trying to bring back the mods. This particular Reddit post is talking about one of the most popular mods to emerge from this community, Bob and Bosip. The mod introduced new characters, original music, and high-quality artwork that quickly made it a fan favorite. The V's Bob and Bosip mod was primarily created by Amor Altra, a figure who himself had a very public downfall from FNF rise to predatory degeneracy, but honestly, we will spare you the details right now. All you need to know is that everyone in the FNF and the broader community collectively hates Amore for being the creep that he is. However, the subject of today's video, Blue, didn't hate him. In fact, in 2021, he released a Google Doc defending Amore. Yes, that's right. And don't worry, we are also going to briefly touch on the Amore situation and how it ties to the document Blue released in a short while. For now, let's just focus on what the mod was about. For those of you who might not be aware of what it was, the mod was released in 2021 and became one of the most popular Friday Night Funkin' mods of its era. We mean, you can still find plenty of edits and videos online. Another detail we would like to mention is that Bob and Bosip were originally based on Amor Altra's Geometry Dash icons. Bob on his Geometry Dash cube icon, and Bosip on his Geometry Dash ship icon. The name Bosip literally comes from Bob and Ship, and behind many of the visuals associated with the project was a graphic designer known online as BlueSkys, who served as a UI designer for the mod. Fun fact, we actually had a lot of trouble finding anything about BlueSkys, or his original name, all thanks to the social media site that kept popping up every time we looked up his name. However, we did find this link tree where he had stated that he's a graphic designer from Los Angeles, also known as Jake, so we are guessing that his real first name is at least. Anyways, at the time, through his work, BlueSkys gained a significant following and became a recognizable figure within both the FNF and Geometry Dash communities. His OC was a bluebird that highly resembled Mordecai from the regular show. However, it was far from anything meant for children. Regardless, his reputation used to be that of a very wholesome bluebird. At one point, his videos even hit 1 million views. His YouTube account name has since been changed to Morning Coffee, and everything has been removed from the account. But we did find this community tab post in which he seems to be thanking people for hitting 1 million views. However, over time, the conversation surrounding BlueSkys shifted dramatically. Instead of being known primarily for his artwork and contributions to the community, he became the subject of numerous controversies and serious allegations. Former friends, community members, and collaborators began sharing accusations ranging from manipulation and victim blaming to inappropriate interactions and other forms of misconduct. And that's putting it lightly, because so far he has repeatedly shown victim blaming tendencies, kept a huge folder of nudies on his computer which might or might not contain CP. He has openly admitted to being addicted to corn, apologized repeatedly for his actions, and eventually got cancelled for good and disappeared from the internet. However, before diving into those allegations, it's important to understand both the community that helped make creators like BlueSkys famous and the culture that allowed these online personalities to gain such large audiences. While some critics have argued that the FNF community has struggled with recurring incidents involving predatory behavior and misconduct, many fans reject the idea that these controversies define the community as a whole. Like any large online fandom, the actions of a few individuals do not necessarily represent everyone involved. So, who exactly is BlueSkys? How did he become one of the most recognizable artists in the FNF scene? And what led to his dramatic fall from grace? That's the story we'll be exploring today. When we looked into the now mostly inactive BlueSkys channel, we discovered that it was originally created in 2013. Back in its prime, the channel apparently had thousands of followers. But as with a lot of internet stories like this, that peak didn't really last long. Things slowly faded, and then eventually, well, it basically disappeared from relevance. From what we were able to find out, the first real initial controversy surrounding Blue seems to stem from a document released by him in 2021, where he was basically defending Amore. Now, for those who don't already know why the internet collectively decided to turn on this guy, here's the simplified and toned down version of the situation. Amore was basically accused of producing some extremely inappropriate content. He drew NSFW art of children, which also included real minors. He also interacted with a lot of minors inappropriately and was high-key a rumor. In 2021, things surrounding Amor were already at their peak online. At the time, he was facing a wave of allegations, ranging from claims about how he treated his mod team to a long list of uncomfortable incidents involving minors. Whether all of it was fully proven or not, the internet had already decided its verdict, and Amor had basically become public enemy number one in certain circles. And this is exactly the point where Blue decided to step into the situation. Instead of staying on the sidelines, Blue got directly involved in the discourse around Amor. He discussed multiple accusations and controversies at the time, and for the most part, he was seen defending Amor rather than condemning him. While he did acknowledge some issues, the overall tone of his document was still largely in Amor's corner. But there was one specific part of this entire situation that ended up becoming the most relevant to today's topic. It involved NSFW artwork made by Amor featuring Amor himself, Blue, and another creator known as Mini Shui. Now, the important detail here is that Mini Shui was a minor at the time. According to Blue's own document, he admitted that he was the oldest in the group. He was 19, Amor was 18, and Mini Shui was only 16 at the time the artwork was made. And the artwork in question? Well, it's absolutely disgusting. Even Blue himself later acknowledged that he should never have consented to it being created in the first place. He admitted fault in being involved and expressed regret over participating in something like that. Despite all of this, Blue seemed to move on from the situation for a while without major immediate consequences. But as always on the internet, nothing really stays buried forever. Enter Sibo. Now, Sibo is often credited as the person who really helped bring a lot of this back into the spotlight. He wasn't just some random outsider either, he was actually connected to Blue professionally, having worked as a voice actor for Bosip. On top of that, they were also reportedly friends at one point, which makes the later fallout even messier. Their relationship allegedly included exchanges of messages that can only be described as inappropriate. We will get into this part later. Coming back to the Mini Shui controversy, Blue did eventually address parts of it in his document. The original version isn't widely available anymore, but Seebo provided an archive of it in his own Google document against Blue. And on that note, we think it's finally time to jump into Seebo's document. Now, unfortunately, most of the evidence Seebo originally included in this document, particularly the screenshots and image links, no longer works today. A lot of it has simply disappeared over time. However, there was one thing that ended up being incredibly useful for preserving this information. A YouTube creator called Serial Introvert archived many of those screenshots in a video covering the situation, which made it possible to reconstruct much of the timeline and verify what was originally being presented. So, let's start from the beginning. The date was March 13th, 2022, when Sibo published a Google document and shared it publicly on Twitter. Alongside the post, he wrote, "Please read this and retweet it for visibility, a document concerning BlueSkys." And trust us when we say that this document is not exactly a light read. For this section of the video, we're going to focus specifically on Sibo's allegations, evidence, and opinions, since this was the primary document released against Blue. And there is a lot to go through. The document contains numerous accusations, archived screenshots, personal accounts, and claims regarding Blue's behavior over several years. Some of the evidence is stronger than others, some of it requires additional context, and some of it has been heavily debated within the community ever since. So our goal here isn't to blindly accept everything written in the document, but rather to examine the claims one by one, look at the evidence that was provided, and determine what actually holds up. Because once you start digging into this thing, it quickly becomes clear that this rabbit hole goes much deeper than a single controversy. So, part 1 of Seebo's document essentially brought the Mini Shui controversy back into the spotlight. According to Seebo, Blue was fully aware of the ages of everyone involved, yet still consented to the artwork being created. He argued that Blue largely escaped criticism at the time because most of the public attention was focused on Amor, who was already facing heavy backlash from multiple directions. Now, to Blue's credit, he did address the situation in his own document. He apologized for his involvement and claimed a theory that he had saved the artwork to his collection years earlier, but had largely forgotten about it until it resurfaced online. However, Sibo disputed this explanation. As evidence, he included a screenshot from a conversation between himself and Blue that allegedly took place when Sibo was 17 years old. In that conversation, Blue reportedly shared a screenshot of his collection of saved NSFW content, which supposedly contained nearly 11 gigabytes of files. Yeah, let that sink in. Based on this screenshot, Sibo argued that Blue's claim of having long since discarded the artwork didn't really add up. According to him, the image suggested that Blue had been actively maintaining this collection over an extended period of time rather than simply forgetting about it. And that wasn't the only issue Sibo raised. He also claimed that despite Mini Shui being underage, Blue had allowed them to follow one of his NSFW accounts. Blue would later state that Mini had eventually been removed, but Sibo questioned both the timing and the circumstances surrounding that decision. In other words, Seebo's argument wasn't just that Blue had made a mistake years ago. His position was that Blue's actions before and after the controversy showed a pattern of behavior that contradicted many of the explanations he later gave. However, arguably the most disturbing section of Seebo's document involves a series of screenshots showing conversations between himself and Blue. For context, Sibo states that he was 17 years old at the time, while Blue was 18. Sibo makes it clear that the issue, in his view, was not necessarily the age difference itself. Instead, he alleges that throughout these conversations, he was heavily intoxicated. According to Sibo, Blue was aware of his condition but continued engaging in increasingly personal and flirtatious conversations regardless. This allegation would later become one of the central points of criticism on Twitter. Now, before jumping to conclusions, let's look at the screenshots themselves one at a time. In the first screenshot, Sibo tells Blue that he enjoys being drunk and mentions that some people like talking to him when he's intoxicated. He then questions whether he should have messaged Blue in the first place. At least from this screenshot alone, there doesn't appear to be anything particularly alarming. What it does establish, however, is that Sibo explicitly informed Blue that he was drunk during the conversation. And that detail becomes important as we move on to the rest of the messages, because much of Sibo's argument hinges on the claim that Blue knew about his state throughout the interaction. However, the claim that Blue initiated the interaction is not entirely clear from the available screenshots. In the next image, it appears that Sibo may have been the one who first steered the conversation in that direction. This complicates the narrative, as it suggests the interaction may not have started in the way initially implied. From there, the conversation only escalated, eventually leading to Blue sending a very not-so-decent image to Sibo. At this point, the situation becomes difficult to interpret definitively. Based on the screenshots alone, it can be argued that both parties were actively participating in the exchange. However, the context surrounding it significantly complicates how that interaction is viewed. Sibo sharing the image publicly, even in a censored form, also raises separate questions about boundaries and privacy. At the same time, there are important factors that cannot be ignored. Sibo has stated that he was underage at the time and heavily intoxicated during the interaction, which places the entire situation in a more serious and complicated light. But Sibo didn't stop at a single example. In his document, he presented additional screenshots and claims which, according to him, pointed toward a broader pattern of inappropriate interactions involving Blue's online accounts and minors. These included alleged conversations with underage users as well as activity on alternate accounts that Sibo argued were part of the same overall issue. He also referenced a conversation between Blue and a 15-year-old in which Blue was asking for some videos. Sibo also said that he had discovered from anonymous sources that Blue had a lot of minors on his alt Twitter account and he had interacted with other minors as well, asking them for nudies and engaged in all activities with them. According to Sibo, his alt Twitter account might be made for the sole purpose of interacting with minors. And to support this claim, he added a screenshot of Blue liking tweets made by an underage creator who was 16 years old, and they even had their age mentioned in their bio. Sibo concluded this section of the document with another serious claim, stating that, according to anonymous sources, Blue had an interest in lie content. However, it's important to note that no screenshots or direct evidence were provided to support this specific allegation. He then moved into what he described as the final section of the document, where he labeled Blue as a manipulative individual. Sibo claimed that Blue had a pattern of seeking attention within elite GD community servers and was frequently involved in private group spaces within the Geometry Dash community. He also alleged instances where Blue had taken inspiration from, or directly reused, other creators' content without proper credit. To support this, Sibo included two links, one to an original animation and another suggesting similarities in Blue's work. Blue, according to the document, had previously responded to such accusations by stating that his work was only inspired by others rather than copied outright. Now for context, this is the original Japanese animation. And this is the one Blue made. Sibo also referenced a separate incident involving a well-known case within the Geometry Dash community, where a rumor named Krazen was exposed. In that situation, Blue had made a public post that was interpreted by some as victim blaming. He said, "Always makes me sad seeing the people responsible for canceling someone use it as a platform to like or retweet farm after the problems have been dealt with. Why do people on Twitter such so much?" This post was made in extremely bad faith because the victim was publicly talking about the situation, and according to Blue, the victim was acting immaturely. This is honestly a disgusting thing to say, in our opinion, about anyone who is a literal rooming victim. He later issued a follow-up statement, apologizing and clarifying his position, but the damage was already done. Sibo used this as part of a broader argument, suggesting a pattern in which Blue would make controversial statements and later walk them back after receiving backlash. However, it's important to note that not all of these claims were supported with concrete evidence, and several points rely heavily on interpretation of past posts and interactions. Even so, the overall conclusion based on the material we have gathered so far is this. Blue has victim blamed at least once given the Crazen situation. He has interacted with accounts claiming to be 15 years old, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and he had a huge recollection of NSFW art and corn on his computer that he did not back away from flexing on Discord. So yeah, things look really bad for Blue. But the situation is far from being over. Only a few hours after Sibo released his document, Blue responded with his own statement, addressing the allegations point by point. And in this next section, we'll go through exactly how he attempted to defend himself against everything that had just been said. First off, about the Mini Shui situation, he said that he did not get off scot-free. According to him, he lost friends over the controversy, apologized multiple times, and even released a full document addressing what happened. And while it is true that he did release a document, much of it was still largely framed in support of Amore at the time. However, one thing that even critics tend to acknowledge is that he did express visible regret and emotion regarding the artwork itself and his involvement in it. The next issue he addressed was the fact that he had hidden the Amor art within his computer. For this section, his response was essentially that Sibo took his statements out of context, which is how he attempted to explain the discrepancy. However, nothing really compares to his explanation regarding the nudies folder allegation. In response, he essentially stated, and we quote, "I am a corn addict and I have been ever since I joined the furry community. I didn't want to have to bring this to light to the public because I'm not proud of how addicted I am, but I overly save almost every single erotic image that I enjoy, and my current NSFW folder is around the range of 300 gigabytes of content. It includes YIF and NSFW art from 18 plus accounts that I follow on my alt. I do not collect nudies of any non-corn star. Everything in that folder is either YIF and adult content." So, based on his own explanation, he admitted to saving a significant amount of adult content he came across online. Overall, Blue maintained that he had a folder on his computer which contained NSFW artwork, including the art Amore made of his OC, which he claimed he had simply forgotten about until it was brought back into circulation and shared online. Regarding the claim about minors following his Twitter account, he did admit that this was true. However, he stated that around January 2022, he went through and removed those accounts. He also acknowledged that it was his mistake for keeping his account public for a period of time, and accepted that he should have been more careful in managing who could interact with his content. Now, as for the Sibo situation, one point that received strong criticism was Blue's framing of Sibo being drunk during the interaction. He stated, "Many sources from friends who were in the BNB Discord can attest to Sibo having a very serious drinking problem, where we would join mod calls late into the night and drink, shout profanities at the rest of the people in the call. He would horny talk in these drunken states, and after people told him to chill it out, he would get mad and leave the calls." He then shared a screenshot in which Sibo allegedly stated that he was old enough and followed it up with another reference pointing to Seattle's age of consent being 16, noting that Sibo was from Seattle. Blue also brought up the Crazen situation again, pointing out that he had already apologized for his earlier post regarding it, and sure, he did indeed write a long apology to ND. However, one interesting point raised by critics is that while Blue emphasized his previous apology for victim blaming, his response in this case was also viewed by some as shifting responsibility back onto Sibo by focusing on him being semi-drunk. This led to accusations of inconsistency in how accountability was being framed. Overall, many felt that Blue's response lacked strong backing or clear supporting evidence in several areas, and that some of the material he presented was either weak or inconclusive. For example, regarding the alleged conversation with a 15-year-old in which inappropriate content was requested, Blue reportedly provided a screenshot as proof, stating that he could no longer locate the original post in question. As for the 16-year-old account he was accused of interacting with, Blue responded by saying he was not aware the account holder was underage and suggested that the user had misrepresented their age. And his defense of liking the post was that he was spam liking NSFW posts. Way to go, Blue, honestly. All in all, across multiple points in his response, Blue repeatedly maintained that the issues were either misunderstandings, mistakes, or situations where he lacked full information. Critics, however, argued that this pattern made his defense less convincing. Regarding the broader allegations that Blue possessed CP in his nudie collection, he attempted to counter Sibo's claims by providing several links. The first showed Blue scrolling through what he described as his NSFW folder. He wrote, "Here is a full unedited video of me scrolling through that folder. The people inside the folder are Bella Delphine, 22, Saurisma, 24, Scorbuns, and a few nudies from creators on the website for which required account posting age is 18+. In Blue's head, this was somehow going to prove that he did not have CP in his nudie folder. The second link he gave was a screenshot intended to demonstrate that the folder had not been edited since November 2021. The third was presented as evidence that the folder Sibo reference matched the one shown in his own document. However, critics argued that even if the folder itself existed as shown, it did not fully match. As you can see in the older screenshot, the folder size was almost 11 gigabytes. However, in the later screenshot, it was reduced to just 2.89 gigabytes, which definitely means that between 2020 and 2021, Blue definitely deleted a huge portion of his collection, which might and could potentially include various forms of CP. Now, none of this really proved anything conclusively. If we had to give our own opinion, Blue's response did very little to clear the air. Many of his explanations relied on claims that he either made a mistake, didn't know, or was being taken out of context. Whether you find that convincing is entirely up to you, but for a lot of people, it simply wasn't enough. And honestly, all of this should have been the end of the drama. But it wasn't. In fact, things got even more heated after Blue released his response. Truth be told, many people felt his defense was weak and lacked substantial evidence. On top of that, his comments about Sibo being drunk during and horny taking during their interactions rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. One of those people was another voice actor closely associated with the BNB mod team, Mike the Magic Man, the voice of Bob. Mike then took to Twitter to speak in Sibo's defense. He wrote, "I don't get involved in drama, but I cannot let blatant slander of my friend slide. Sibo is not an alcoholic, not even close. Does Sibo drink regularly? Absolutely. But calling him addicted to alcohol is absolutely ridiculous. First off, until August, Sibo lived at home. Under Washington state law, as long as a parent permits it, minors may drink at home. I'm 100% sure his parents are okay with him drinking. We've had many conversations about this, and even when he went to college, don't be oblivious. Everyone drinks at college, and even at college, he drank a lot less. This fact you're bringing up, that he yelled profanities at people in calls, absolutely baffles me, considering I have never heard him do this. Unless I'm misunderstanding things here, this is completely fabricated. I call with Sibo multiple times a week, normally in calls with other friends, and I can't really think of any time where he's constantly yelled profanities at anyone. If you're going to say that I didn't join those BNB mod calls that often, then yeah, sure, that's true, but there's no way there have been completely isolated cases of this and that it has suddenly stopped after BNB. You also say that he would drunkenly flirt with people in calls, and this again makes zero sense. Claiming people would tell him to chill out in these calls is just a straight lie. Most of these calls also included Amore, and it is absolutely ridiculous to think. This was only a small part of a much larger thread that Mike wrote regarding the situation, and in it, he also referenced a call that had been mentioned in both Sibo's and Blue's documents. According to both accounts, Sibo, Mike, and Blue had all been in a voice call together at one point, where Sibo and Blue ended up arguing over some stupid game. The details of that argument differed depending on whose version you're reading, but one thing is, in this screenshot shared by Sibo, you can see him trying to reason with Blue and explain that he didn't like the way he had been treated during the call. This conversation comes from a direct message that Sibo sent to Blue shortly afterward. From Sibo's messages, it seems like he was simply trying to communicate how he felt he had been repeatedly disrespected and talked over. In response, Blue essentially replied by saying that it was just his style of conversation. He said that arguments naturally involve interruptions and people talking over one another, adding, "I just think it's something you need to get used to, and I fucking hate saying that." Blue then continued by saying that if someone can't communicate their main point immediately, people are going to assume that whatever comes afterward is less important or simply fluff. He also told Sibo, "You're the only person I know that has continually left calls because you're upset. I see it all the time. I don't have control over it." Whether you agree with Blue's perspective or not, the exchange gives some insight into why tensions between the two had become so strained by this point. From what we can see from these messages, it does come across as a bullying situation, and even Mike's Twitter thread seemed to support that interpretation. Further in his thread, Mike wrote, "To put it lastly, you have severely downplayed the situation about the argument you had. I was in that call. It was a late night in Bob's lounge, not a BNB call. Amor and Sibo were playing Super Auto Pets. And while I can't exactly remember the specifics of the argument, I can 100% say that what happened was not light shit talking. You were seriously heated about Sibo playing Super Auto Pets, to the point where you caused him to leave the call. And if you think maybe I'm misremembering things, I've already talked to someone else who was in that call, and they are in complete agreement with me." However, in Blue's document, he appeared to heavily downplay the situation, describing it as nothing more than some light trash talk over a game. But according to Mike's account, that wasn't what happened at all, and Mike wasn't the only person pushing back on Blue's version of events. Sibo himself also made a personal Twitter thread addressing several of the claims made about him. Much like Mike, he denied the allegations regarding his drinking and rejected the idea that he regularly shouted profanities at people or behaved in the way Blue had described. He further clarified that he never explicitly said Blue was the one who initiated inappropriate conversations with him, but rather that the interaction began after Blue himself made comments implying he was horny. However, this specific detail is not clearly visible in the text messages that were shared publicly. The main point Sibo continued to emphasize was the allegation involving a 15-year-old where Blue was accused of asking for inappropriate videos. According to Sibo, Blue did not provide any strong or conclusive proof to fully disprove that claim. Because of that, the accusation remained particularly impactful among viewers. As we've mentioned multiple times before, Blue's response overall was seen by many as shaky and lacking strong supporting evidence, which made it difficult for him to fully shift public perception in his favor. In the end, after a large portion of the community turned against him, Blue released another statement asking people to give him some space. He said, in the end, after a large portion of the community turned against him, Blue released another statement asking people to give him some space. He said, reading back, I did a severe amount of victim blaming and deflecting against Sibo's points while not providing solid evidence. I hold myself accountable for rushing a half-assed apology while being such a defensive asshole. I felt cornered and lashed out against his word, and that's a seriously fucked up thing to do. I am sorry for the defamation I put onto Sibo while trying to defend myself, and I take it back. For the record, he is not an alcoholic. He's perfectly legal to be drinking at home. I shouldn't have interacted with him that way while he was drunk. That was solely my fault and not his, considering he wasn't in the right headspace. He didn't make sexual advances on anyone on call. He was drunk, he is in the right here, and there is no excuse for me saying he did those things. My memory of it was flawed. Don't forgive me, I simply wanted to make a response that was defensible and I shouldn't have brought up age of consent state laws. I'm going to talk to my college counselor to ask for help in getting someone who can help me think of how to improve myself going forward. I'm going to take a break to figure out ways I can apologize properly to the victims of my actions. Not for forgiveness, obviously, but just to make it clear I want to improve and I don't want to die on this hill. My PFP will remain black so people don't harass the artists showcased on my account and meme them because of my fucked up actions. I'm going to do college for a bit and become a better person. So overall, Blue's response to everything seemed to center around him acknowledging his mistakes and stating that he would seek help, including speaking to a college counselor. Honestly speaking, he did admit to several things he had previously denied or downplayed in earlier parts of the document. He acknowledged being overly defensive, making statements without solid evidence and misrepresenting certain aspects of the situation. That being said, we strongly believe this entire situation should not turn into harassment or targeted bullying toward anyone involved. Regardless of where people stand on the allegations, the situation as a whole is extremely complex and heavily disputed. From our perspective, Blue came across as someone who handled the situation poorly and failed to fully understand the impact of his actions on others at the time. Whether those actions were intentional or not is something that remains debated, but it is clear that his interactions with others played a significant role in how this controversy unfolded. At the same time, it's also important to note that not every allegation presented in Sibo's document is universally agreed upon, and parts of the situation remain unverified or interpreted differently depending on the source. On this note, we would like to end this video. If you liked it, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and let us know your thoughts on the situation.